Victoria Hayes stood at the entrance of Riverside Elementary School, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor as she made her way to the principal's office. As the newly appointed head of the school board's scholarship committee, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from years of privilege and success. Her perfectly tailored suit and meticulously styled hair reflected the careful control she maintained over every aspect of her life. The reason for her visit was simple: to evaluate candidates for the prestigious Hayes Foundation Scholarship, a program she had established in her late husband's name. This year, one application had caught her attention, not for its merit, but for what she perceived as its audacity. A single father, working as a janitor, daring to apply for his daughter to attend one of the most exclusive private schools in the city. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming," Principal Roberts greeted her warmly, though there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Mr. Connor and his daughter are waiting in the conference room." Victoria nodded curtly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I hope you understand, Principal Roberts, that my time is valuable. I reviewed their application, and I must say, I'm only here as a courtesy to your recommendation." The principal's expression tightened slightly. "I believe you'll find both Sarah and her father quite remarkable, Ms. Hayes. They deserve a fair chance." As they entered the conference room, Victoria's eyes immediately fell on the pair seated at the large oak table. James Connor sat straight-backed in his chair, wearing what was clearly his best outfit: a clean but worn button-down shirt and slightly faded slacks. His hands, rough from years of manual labor, were folded carefully on the table. Beside him sat his daughter Sarah, a small girl of 11 with bright eyes and neatly braided hair, wearing a second-hand uniform that had been precisely pressed. "Mr. Connor," Victoria began, her tone cool and professional as she took her seat, "I've reviewed your application for the Hayes Foundation Scholarship. While your daughter's academic achievements are noteworthy, I have some concerns about the sustainability of this arrangement." James Connor met her gaze steadily, his green eyes reflecting a quiet dignity that momentarily caught Victoria off guard. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Hayes," he replied, his voice soft but firm. "But I assure you, Sarah's education is my highest priority." Victoria raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the file before her. "You work as a janitor at Memorial Hospital, correct? And you're raising Sarah alone?" "Yes, ma'am," James answered, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I've been both mother and father to Sarah since my wife passed away 5 years ago." Something in his tone made Victoria pause, a flash of memory crossing her mind. The day she lost her own husband, Richard, 2 years ago. She pushed the thought away quickly, returning to her professional demeanor. "Mr. Connor, this scholarship isn't just about academic performance. Riverside Academy has certain standards. Our students come from families who can provide the necessary support system, both financially and socially. The annual events, the fundraisers, the social obligations. How do you expect to maintain such commitments on a janitor's salary?" Sarah, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Ms. Hayes, may I show you something?" Before Victoria could object, the young girl pulled out a carefully maintained notebook from her backpack. As she opened it, Victoria saw pages filled with neat handwriting, complex mathematical equations, and detailed scientific drawings. "This is my research journal," Sarah explained, her voice trembling slightly, but growing stronger with each word. "Dad helps me with my experiments every weekend. We turned our kitchen into a lab, and he stays up late after his shift to help me understand the harder concepts." Victoria's eyes moved from the impressive notebook to James Connor's face, noting the pride and love that softened his features as he looked at his daughter. Despite herself, she felt a crack forming in her carefully constructed wall of judgment. "Sarah ranked first in the state science fair last month," James added quietly. "She used recycled materials we collected from the hospital, with permission, of course. She wanted to create an affordable water filtration system for developing countries." Principal Roberts, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. "Ms. Hayes, if I may, Sarah's project has already caught the attention of several environmental organizations. She has the potential to do remarkable things, given the right opportunities. Victoria found herself studying the father and daughter more closely. There was something in their interaction that struck a chord within her. The way James looked at Sarah reminded her of how Richard used to look at her, with that mixture of pride and unwavering support. But old habits died hard, and Victoria straightened in her chair, maintaining her professional facade. While this is all very impressive, Mr. Connor, you must understand that Riverside Academy isn't just about academic achievement. Our community has certain expectations, Ms. Hayes, James interrupted gently. I know what you see when you look at us, a janitor and his daughter reaching beyond our station. But every night after my shift, I sit with Sarah and help her with her homework. Every weekend, we visit the library and museums. I may not have much money, but everything I have, every ounce of energy, every spare minute, every dollar, goes into giving my daughter the best future possible. As he spoke, Victoria noticed the small details she had initially overlooked. The way Sarah's uniform, though second-hand, was immaculately maintained. The careful organization of their documents, the quiet confidence in James's voice that came not from privilege, but from unwavering dedication. A memory surfaced unbidden, Richard's voice from years ago. Tori, sometimes the strongest people are the ones who face the greatest challenges with quiet dignity. Before Victoria could respond, an emergency alert suddenly blared through the school speaker system. Principal Roberts rushed to the door, his face concerned. There's been an accident in the science lab, chemical spill. James Connor immediately stood up, his posture changing from nervous parent to capable professional. I work with hazardous materials at the hospital. I can help if you need it. Victoria watched as the man she had dismissed as just a janitor transformed before her eyes, his expertise and quick thinking suddenly valuable in a crisis. As James followed Principal Roberts out of the room, Sarah remained seated, her eyes fixed on Victoria, with a mixture of hope and determination that seemed far beyond her years. The scholarship committee head found herself at a crossroads, her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crack under the weight of what she had witnessed. But this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything Victoria Hayes thought she knew about worth, dignity, and the true meaning of success. Victoria found herself following Sarah through the school's corridors, their hurried footsteps echoing against the walls as they made their way toward the science lab. The acrid smell of chemicals grew stronger as they approached, and Victoria could hear James Connor's steady voice giving instructions through the partially open door. Everyone needs to stay back, James was saying, his tone authoritative but calm. Principal Roberts, we need to evacuate this entire wing immediately. These fumes could be dangerous. Victoria watched from the doorway as James efficiently assessed the situation. A cabinet had fallen, shattering several bottles of chemicals. The resulting mixture was creating potentially hazardous fumes, and 2 students were trapped in the far corner of the room, unable to reach the exit without crossing through the spill. What happened next changed Victoria's perception forever. James quickly removed his worn button-down shirt, revealing a simple white t-shirt underneath. He used the shirt to cover his nose and mouth, then began methodically making his way through the room, carefully avoiding the spreading puddle of chemicals. "Sir, the hazmat team is on their way," one of the teachers called out anxiously. "These kids can't wait that long," James replied, his voice muffled but determined. "I've handled worse spills at the hospital. Trust me." Victoria felt Sarah's small hand slip into hers, surprising her with the gesture of trust. The girl's eyes were fixed on her father, showing not fear, but complete confidence in his abilities. "Dad knows what he's doing," Sarah whispered. "He trained himself in chemical safety so he could help me with my experiments safely." As James reached the trapped students, Victoria noticed how he maintained his calm demeanor, speaking softly to the frightened teenagers while guiding them through the safest path to the door. His movements were precise and practiced, his focus unwavering. Once the students were safely out, James turned his attention to the spill itself. He quickly identified the chemicals involved by reading the broken bottle's labels and instructed the chemistry teacher on which neutralizing agents to fetch from the storage room. "Mr. Connor," Principal Roberts began, clearly impressed, "where did you learn all this?" James worked as he spoke, his hands steady as he helped contain the spill. "When I started working at the hospital, I took every safety course they offered. Then I started studying on my own time, chemistry, biology, anything that could make me better at my job. Sarah's interest in science gave me even more reason to learn." Victoria found herself mesmerized by the transformation. The nervous father from the conference room was gone, replaced by a confident professional who commanded respect through expertise rather than status. She thought about how quickly she had dismissed him based on his job title, never considering the depth of knowledge and dedication it might entail. When the hazmat team finally arrived, they praised James's quick thinking and proper handling of the situation. As the excitement died down and the all clear was given, Victoria noticed James collecting his ruined shirt from where he had dropped it. "That was your best shirt, wasn't it?" she asked quietly, remembering how carefully pressed it had been during their meeting. James looked down at the chemical-stained fabric and shrugged with a small smile. "It served a good purpose. Besides, Sarah's safety is worth more than any piece of clothing." "Dad!" Sarah ran to embrace her father, and Victoria watched their interaction with new eyes. The love between them was palpable, but there was something else too. A mutual respect and understanding that went beyond the typical parent-child relationship. "Mr. Connor," Victoria found herself saying, "would you and Sarah join me for dinner this evening? I believe we have more to discuss regarding the scholarship application." James hesitated, glancing down at his white undershirt. "I appreciate the invitation, Ms. Hayes, but I'm not exactly dressed for—" "Please," Victoria interrupted, surprising herself with the genuineness in her voice. "I insist. And—" She paused, a slight smile softening her features. "It's Victoria." Later that evening, at a small family restaurant chosen by James, rather than the upscale establishment Victoria had initially suggested, she learned the full story of the Connors' journey. Over plates of simple but hearty food, James shared how he had transformed his life after his wife's death. "When Maria passed away," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I was lost. I had no college degree, no specialized skills, just a broken heart and a 6-year-old daughter who needed me. The janitor position at the hospital was the only job I could get, but I promised myself it wouldn't be the end of our story." Sarah, who had been quietly eating her dinner, looked up at her father with shining eyes. "Dad started taking night classes at the community college," she added proudly. "He helps the nurses now too when they're short-staffed." "Is that true?" Victoria asked, genuinely interested. James nodded modestly. "I've completed several healthcare certification courses. The hospital has a good educational support program for employees. Every time I learn something new, I share it with Sarah. We treat everything as a learning opportunity." Victoria thought about her own journey, how she had inherited her position of privilege through marriage, and had sometimes wielded it as a weapon of judgment. She thought about Richard, and how disappointed he would be in how she had initially treated the Connors. "Sarah," Victoria asked, turning to the young girl, "what made you interested in science?" Sarah's face lit up with enthusiasm. "After Mom died, I got really scared about losing Dad too. I started reading medical books, trying to understand what happened to Mom. Dad saw how interested I was and started bringing home books from the hospital library. We turned it into our special thing, learning together." Victoria noticed James's eyes glistening with unshed tears as his daughter spoke. She realized that this man had taken the worst moment of his life and transformed it into an opportunity to bond with his daughter, to build something meaningful from their shared pain. "The water filtration project," Victoria prompted, remembering the notebook from earlier. "Tell me more about that." For the next hour, Sarah excitedly explained her research, while James added technical details, demonstrating their seamless partnership. Victoria watched them interact, seeing how James never overshadowed his daughter's achievements, but supported and amplified them. As their plates were cleared away, Victoria made a decision that would alter not only the Connors' lives, but her own perspective forever. However, before she could speak, an unexpected visitor to the restaurant would add another layer of complexity to the evening's revelations. Through the restaurant's window, Victoria spotted a familiar face. Charles Winchester, the president of Riverside Academy's Board of Trustees and one of her late husband's closest friends. As he entered the restaurant and noticed their table, his expression shifted from surprise to barely concealed disdain. The next few moments would test Victoria's newfound understanding and force her to take a public stand that would either uphold or challenge the very system she had helped maintain for so long. Charles Winchester's polished leather shoes clicked against the restaurant's floor as he approached their table, his tall frame casting a shadow over their comfortable gathering. Victoria watched as James instinctively straightened in his chair, his protective nature evident in the way he shifted slightly closer to Sarah. "Victoria," Charles greeted, his cultured voice carrying a note of concern. "What an unexpected surprise. I didn't realize you were—" He paused, his eyes sliding dismissively over James and Sarah. "Conducting scholarship interviews here." Victoria felt a flash of shame at recognizing her own earlier prejudices reflected in Charles's tone. Before she could respond, a commotion near the kitchen drew their attention. An elderly woman had collapsed, and the restaurant staff were rushing to her aid. "Call 911!" someone shouted, panic rising in their voice. James was on his feet before anyone else could move. "I'm certified in first aid," he announced calmly, moving quickly to the woman's side. Victoria and the others watched as he knelt beside her, his movements confident and professional. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" James's voice was gentle but clear. "I'm going to check your pulse now." His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assessed her condition. "Sarah, sweetheart, could you get my phone from my jacket? The emergency protocols are saved there." Sarah quickly retrieved the phone, and Victoria noticed how seamlessly father and daughter worked together, their previous nervousness forgotten in the face of someone needing help. Charles Winchester stood frozen, his expression a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration. "She's having a diabetic episode," James announced after a quick assessment. "Does anyone have orange juice or hard candy?" The restaurant's owner rushed forward with a glass of juice. James supported the woman's head as she slowly sipped, explaining each step to the worried crowd gathering around them. Within minutes, color returned to the woman's cheeks, and her confusion began to clear. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping James's hand. "You're the janitor from Memorial, aren't you? The one who always checks on us during dialysis treatments." Victoria's eyebrows rose in surprise, and she noticed Charles shifting uncomfortably beside her. James simply smiled at the woman. "Yes, Mrs. Chen. You should be more careful about eating before your evening walk. He knows all the regulars," Mrs. Chen explained to the onlookers, her voice growing stronger. "Keeps track of our schedules. Reminds us to take our medications. More attentive than some of the doctors, if you ask me." As the paramedics arrived to do a formal check, Victoria watched James step back, quietly returning to their table. Sarah beamed at her father with pure pride, while Charles Winchester seemed to be struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with his preconceptions. "Mr. Connor," Charles finally spoke, his tone notably different, "I wasn't aware you had medical training." "I'm not a medical professional," James replied modestly. "I just try to learn whatever I can to help others. Working in a hospital, you see a lot of people at their most vulnerable. A little kindness and knowledge can make a big difference." Victoria found herself thinking about Richard again, about his belief that true character was revealed in how people treated those they weren't required to help. She thought about all the times she had walked past service workers without really seeing them, without considering the lives they touched and the differences they made. "James," she said suddenly, "I don't think we need to discuss the scholarship further." She noticed his face fall slightly before she continued, "Because as far as I'm concerned, Sarah already has it. In fact, I'd like to propose something more." Charles started to protest. "Victoria, the board has procedures." "The board," Victoria interrupted firmly, "gave me full discretion over the Hayes Foundation Scholarship Program. But you're right, Charles. We do need to follow procedures, which is why I'm also going to propose a new position at Riverside Academy." She turned to James, whose expression showed careful hope mixed with confusion. "We need someone to oversee our new student safety and community outreach programs. Someone with practical experience in emergency response. Someone who understands both the technical and human aspects of safety. Someone who has demonstrated their ability to learn, adapt, and care for others." "Ms. Hayes." "Victoria," James began, his voice uncertain, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "Dad," Sarah interrupted softly, "remember what you always tell me. Never let fear of reaching too high stop you from growing." Victoria watched as James's eyes filled with tears at hearing his own words reflected back to him by his daughter. But before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation, one that would reveal an unexpected connection and add yet another layer to the evening's revelations. Dr. Elizabeth Kay, Chief of Medicine at Memorial Hospital, had been dining quietly in a corner booth. She now stood beside their table, her presence commanding immediate attention. "I was wondering when someone would finally recognize James's potential," she said, smiling warmly at the group. "Victoria, if you're serious about this position, I have 5 years' worth of documentation showing exactly why James Connor would be an exceptional addition to your staff." The next few minutes would reveal a history of quiet excellence that even Victoria, with all her recent discoveries about James, hadn't anticipated. But more importantly, they would force everyone present to confront their own biases about success, worth, and the sometimes invisible ways people shape the world around them. As Dr. Kay began to speak, Charles Winchester sank into an empty chair at their table, his worldview about to be challenged as thoroughly as Victoria's had been. The story she would tell would not only change the trajectory of James and Sarah's lives, but would also force Riverside Academy's entire community to re-examine their definition of merit and value. Dr. Elizabeth Kay pulled up a chair to their table, her presence adding gravity to the already charged atmosphere of the small restaurant. Her elegant grey suit and confident demeanor commanded attention, but it was the warmth in her eyes when she looked at James that caught Victoria's attention. "5 years ago," Dr. Kay began, "we had a crisis at Memorial Hospital. Our patient satisfaction rates were plummeting, staff morale was at an all-time low, and we couldn't figure out why. Then one day, I started receiving letters from patients, dozens of them, all mentioning the same person, our night shift janitor who somehow made their stays more bearable." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his humility evident as Dr. Kay continued. "These weren't just thank you notes for clean rooms. Patients wrote about a man who remembered their children's names, who knew when they needed an extra blanket before they asked, who could explain complex medical procedures in simple terms while mopping the floors." Victoria noticed Charles Winchester leaning forward, his earlier disdain replaced by genuine interest. Sarah reached for her father's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "But what really caught my attention," Dr. Kay continued, pulling out her tablet and opening a file, "was when our mortality rates in the intensive care unit started dropping. It took us months to figure out why, until one of our nurses finally spoke up." She turned to James, whose face had reddened slightly. "Would you like to tell them about the checklist, James? Or should I?" James cleared his throat softly. "It wasn't anything special," he began, but Dr. Kay interrupted him. "James created a safety checklist system while cleaning the ICU at night. He noticed patterns, which patients seemed to struggle after certain procedures, which medications caused the most side effects, which family members needed extra support. He started leaving notes for the nursing staff, just simple observations at first. The patients were always talking to me, James explained quietly. Sometimes it's easier to share fears with someone who's just there to listen, who isn't rushing off to the next medical emergency. I just started paying attention. Those notes evolved into what we now call the Connor Protocol, Dr. K revealed, causing Charles Winchester to sit up straighter. Yes, Mr. Winchester, the same protocol that was featured in last month's Medical Journal of New England, the one that's been adopted by 12 major hospitals across the country. Victoria watched as Charles's face cycled through various emotions: disbelief, shock, and finally, a kind of grudging respect. But Dr. K wasn't finished. James never wanted recognition for this. In fact, he turned down a formal position on our patient care committee 3 times, saying he could do more good as a janitor who could move freely through the hospital, noticing things others might miss. Sarah looked up at her father, her eyes shining. "You never told me about any of this, Dad." James squeezed her hand. "Some things we do not for recognition, sweetheart, but because they're right. Like your water filtration project. You didn't do it to win awards. You did it because you wanted to help people." Victoria felt tears pricking at her eyes as she remembered Richard's words again. The measure of a person isn't in their title, but in the lives they touch. She had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way, let herself be blinded by social status and appearances. But Dr. K had one more revelation. 2 months ago, James submitted a proposal for a hospital-wide education initiative. He wanted to create a program where service staff, janitors, cafeteria workers, maintenance personnel could receive basic medical training. Not to replace medical professionals, but to create an additional layer of support and safety for patients. She pulled out another document. The board approved it unanimously last week. We're calling it the Second Set of Eyes program, and it's already garnered interest from healthcare facilities across the state. Charles Winchester, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke. "Mr. Connor, James, I owe you an apology. It seems I've made some grievous assumptions." James shook his head. "No apology necessary, Mr. Winchester. We all have our preconceptions. What matters is what we do once we recognize them." Victoria watched this exchange with a growing sense of purpose. She thought about Riverside Academy, about the Hayes Foundation Scholarship, about all the artificial barriers they had created in the name of maintaining standards. But before she could speak, the restaurant's door opened again. A group of hospital workers, nurses, orderlies, and cleaning staff began filing in. They had just finished their shift, still in their uniforms, led by a nurse who Victoria recognized from the news, Marcus Chen, who had recently been honored for his work in emergency medicine. "Sorry to interrupt," Marcus said, approaching their table, "but word got around that James was here and, well," he gestured to the group behind him. "We couldn't let this moment pass without saying something." What happened next would shake the foundations of everything Victoria and Charles thought they knew about influence, leadership, and the true meaning of community impact. As Marcus began to speak, Victoria realized that James Connor's influence extended far beyond a simple checklist or safety protocol. He had quietly created a revolution in patient care, all while pushing a mop and keeping to the shadows. The story that would unfold over the next hour would not only secure James's position at Riverside Academy, but would also force the entire institution to reconsider its definition of excellence. And, for Victoria Hayes, it would provide the push she needed to transform her late husband's legacy into something far more meaningful than she had ever imagined. Marcus Chen stood before the gathered group, his hospital scrubs a stark contrast to the restaurant's warm lighting. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he began to speak, his words painting a picture of impact that went far beyond job titles and social status. "Most of you see James as the quiet janitor who keeps our hospital clean," Marcus began, his voice carrying emotion that made everyone lean forward. "But for many of us, he's been a mentor, a guide, and the reason we're in healthcare today." Victoria watched as James tried to shrink into his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Sarah, however, sat up straighter, her eyes bright with pride, as Marcus continued. 3 years ago, I was working in the hospital cafeteria, struggling to support my family and barely speaking English. James noticed I was interested in medical terminology, so he started teaching me during his breaks. He shared his books, helped me study for my ESL exams, even watched my kids when I had night classes. Marcus gestured to 2 other workers in the group. Maria, there was a housekeeper. Now she's one of our top phlebotomists. Robert was our maintenance guy. Today he runs our medical equipment training program. All because James saw potential in us that others missed. Charles Winchester, who had been silent for some time, cleared his throat. How many people have you helped this way? Mr. Connor? James shifted uncomfortably. I just share what I learn. Everyone has the capacity to grow if given the chance. 28, Dr. K interjected firmly. 28 members of our support staff have advanced to medical positions under James's informal mentorship. Our staff retention rate has doubled, and our patient care metrics are the highest they've been in the hospital's history. Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes as she thought about her late husband, Richard. He had always believed in giving people chances, in looking beyond surface appearances. She had lost sight of that after his death, retreating into the safety of social barriers and prejudices. Dad, Sarah spoke up suddenly, her voice clear and confident. Remember what Mom used to say. Everyone has a story worth hearing, if only we take the time to listen. James's eyes glistened at his daughter's words. Your mother was wise beyond her years. Sweetheart, she would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming. Victoria stood up, her decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. Charles, she said, turning to her fellow board member, I'm not just giving James a position at Riverside Academy, I'm restructuring the entire Hayes Foundation. The restaurant fell silent as Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. The Hayes Scholarship will no longer be just about academic achievement or social status. We're going to create a program that recognizes potential in all its forms. In the student who works nights to support their family, in the parent who studies alongside their child, in the service worker who dreams of something more. She turned to James and Sarah. Your story isn't unique, it's just that most of us never took the time to look for others like you. That changes today. Charles Winchester stood as well, straightening his tie as he made his own decision. The board will support this, he declared, looking around the room. Not out of charity or obligation, but because it's in our own best interest. Excellence doesn't belong to any one social class. Dr. K smiled warmly. The hospital would be happy to partner with Riverside Academy on this initiative. We could create internship opportunities, mentorship programs. As the adults discussed possibilities, Victoria noticed Sarah pulling out her notebook again. What are you working on? She asked softly. Ideas for the new scholarship program, Sarah replied, her pencil moving quickly across the paper. Dad always says that when you see a way to help others, you should write it down before the moment passes. Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest as she watched this young girl, so wise beyond her years, already thinking about how to help others up the ladder she was just beginning to climb. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the stage at Riverside Academy's annual assembly. The auditorium was filled with a more diverse crowd than the school had ever seen. Students from all backgrounds, parents in everything from business suits to work uniforms, all united by the common thread of potential and determination. James Connor sat in the front row, no longer in his janitor's uniform, but wearing a well-fitted suit as the school's new Director of Community Engagement and Safety. Beside him, Sarah beamed in her Riverside Academy uniform, a gold medal from the National Science Fair hanging around her neck. 1 year ago, Victoria began her speech, I thought I knew what excellence looked like. I thought it wore designer clothes and spoke with a certain accent. I thought it came from specific neighborhoods and had certain kinds of parents. She paused, looking out at the faces before her, faces that would have been absent from this hall just months ago. But true excellence doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't speak with any particular accent. Excellence is the single parent who works 3 jobs so their child can have a better life. It's the student who studies by candlelight when the electricity has been cut off. It's the janitor who sees beyond his job description to save lives and lift others up. In the back of the hall, Dr. K stood with Marcus Chen and several other hospital staff members. The second set of EYES program had been implemented in hospitals across the country, and James's safety protocols had become standard practice in medical facilities nationwide. Today, we're not just celebrating academic achievement, Victoria continued. We're celebrating the human spirit's capacity for growth, for compassion, and for seeing the potential in others that they might not even see in themselves. She gestured to a large screen behind her, which displayed the new Hayes Foundation logo, a simple hand reaching up, with another hand reaching down to help. Below it were the words that James had spoken on that fateful evening. Everyone has the capacity to grow, if given the chance. The Hayes Foundation is no longer just a scholarship program, Victoria announced. It's a promise to look beyond surface appearances, to challenge our own prejudices, and to recognize that excellence can come from anywhere. As applause filled the hall, Victoria caught sight of Sarah wiping tears from her eyes while James held her hand. In that moment, Victoria felt Richard's presence stronger than she had since his death. She could almost hear his voice. Now you understand, Tori. This is what legacy really means. The story of James and Sarah Connor had transformed not just Victoria's perspective, but an entire institution's approach to education and opportunity. More importantly, it had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, touching lives far beyond the walls of Riverside Academy. As Victoria looked out at the sea of faces, each with their own story of struggle, determination, and hope, she realized that this was just the beginning. The true measure of their success wouldn't be in test scores or college acceptances, but in the lives they touched and the barriers they broke down, one story at a time. In the end, it wasn't just about giving people a chance. It was about recognizing that every person's dignity and potential was worth fighting for, regardless of where they came from or what they did for a living. And that, Victoria now understood, was the greatest lesson of all. What would you have done in Victoria's position? Have you ever had a moment that completely changed how you see others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else see the world differently too. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps our channel going strong, allowing us to bring you powerful, emotional stories every single day. And if you're looking for another touching story that will warm your heart and maybe change your perspective, check out our latest video appearing on the left side of your screen right now. Trust me, it's another emotional journey you won't want to miss. Remember, every subscription helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Join our growing family of viewers who believe in the power of storytelling to change hearts and minds. See you in our next video.